Hey guys, just a reminder, my online course is Birth Story Academy, and you can enroll in it at birthstory.com. It's taught by me. You can be in your jammies. It's online. It's pre-recorded, and it has a ton of freebies and downloads. It's everything that you need to prepare for your hospital birth. So hope to see you in Birth Story Academy. Hey guys, it's Heidi, and it is February, and I'm on with my interns today, Katie and Kat and Mariza. They are from all over the US, and we are talking birth statistics and just kind of learnings from my last year of being a doula. So we're going to talk about some birth stories and some statistics and answer a lot of questions and do a lot of teaching. It was really a fun episode to conclude this last semester of my internship with Birth Story Media with these amazing interns, and to talk all about statistics, mine versus the United States, and kind of what having a doula helps with. So let's dig in. It's a really, really fun episode. I hope you enjoy it. What does a contraction feel like? How do I know if I'm in labor? And what does the day of labor look like? Wait, is this normal? Hey, I'm Heidi. My best friends call me Hides. I'm a certified birth doula, host of this podcast, and author of Birth Story, an interactive pregnancy guidebook. I have supported hundreds of women through their labor and deliveries, and I believe every one of them and you deserves a microphone and a stage. So here we are. Listen each week to get answers to these tough questions. Birth Story, where we talk about pregnancy, labor, deliveries, where we tell our stories and share our feelings. And of course, chat about our favorite baby products and motherhood. And because I'm passionate about birth outcomes, you will hear from some of the top experts in labor and delivery. Whether you are pregnant, trying desperately to get pregnant, or you just love a good birth story, I hope you will stick around and be part of this birth story family. Hey guys, good morning.
Good morning.
Hi.
I'm so excited. I already recorded the intro, you guys, so everybody knows who you are, but
That's awesome.
let's go around the room. Kat, you're first. Who are you?
Okay. I'm first.
Yeah.
I'm Kat. I am a birth doula and photographer in Charlotte. Heidi and I are neighbors, actually. I just live down the street from her.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
And what's the name of your company?
It's called The Birth Co. I can't claim that I've coined the term, but I like to call myself a birth companion. So that's kind of where The Birth Co. came from.
I love it. And you guys, Kat actually just went all the way through the internship, just like Katie and Mariza did too. But Kat has actually started taking some doula clients with Birth Story Boutique, which is really exciting for me. So
I love being part of it.
Yeah, me too. Okay, Mariza.
Yeah, my name is Mariza. I am also a birth doula since about 2019. I am located in the Hudson Valley, just about an hour and a half outside of New York City. And I did grow up in Charlotte, so I'm still part of the web, but just further away.
And Mariza currently practices as a doula through one of the hospital systems, right?
Yes. So I take private clients, and then I'm also on the staff, the women's health staff at 2 hospitals in the area. Yep.
Okay. And if somebody's listening in the Hudson Valley area, what is your website, or how do they get a hold of you?
Sure. I am Yourself and Your Birth, and it is just yourselfandyourbirth.com.
Cool. And Katie, how's it going this morning?
Oh, it's going good. I'm Katie. I am located in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and I am a full spectrum doula that focuses on labor with military families.
Awesome. And you're part of the TRICARE network, right?
Yes,
Okay.
finally.
Thank you for serving our military families. So you guys, Kat and Mariza and Katie just finished a full birth story internship. It's open every semester. So it just so happens that we had 2 from North Carolina and 1 from New York, but I've had interns from all around the United States and Canada. So you are always welcome to apply if you are listening to this. And today we're talking about birth statistics. And so I have every year collected data on the births that I attend over the last 22 years. Like, I feel like one day, you guys, I should have like an honorary PhD, right? Like, I should be able to go to a school and say, look at all of this data. I've already done my thesis.
I agree.
I have 22 years of data. And so I really like to look at the difference between what's going on in the world, what's going on in the United States, and then what's going on in like my small corner of the universe. And there have been some years where I have attended 100 births in a year, and then some years where I attended only 20 or 30 births in a year. I mean, I still feel like maybe that's a lot of births to attend, even the 20 or 30. But this past year, I would say, was a quieter year. I had taken on a total of 54 doula clients for the year, and part of the year was with a partner. So I ended up attending 43 births, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to not only talk about the statistics, but Kat and Mariza and Katie have a lot of questions. And so I think their questions are probably what's on your mind, right? So when we talk about things like epidural rate, we're going to talk about why it is what it is or why it might be different. So I'm excited that you guys are here today. Yay.
I'm excited to learn.
Okay, cool. And then, Kat, I think you said you had an icebreaker too.
I did have an icebreaker. Are you still up for an icebreaker?
Yeah, let's do an icebreaker.
I was like, I've actually never been on a podcast. I used to help produce a podcast. And so I'm just like, oh, you got to make them fun.
Yeah.
So my icebreaker is for all of us, and Heidi included, in our work as birth workers, what has been like the most surprising statistic that we've experienced in our work, whether it's for 25 years like Heidi, or for, the past year, like some of us. So that's kind of my little question to kick us off.
Okay, well, why don't you answer it first?
Yes, I will start.
Because Kat, when was the first time, how long have you been attending births at this point? Like, this perspective is 1 year long?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I almost to the day, actually, February 28th of 2024 was my first birth of a dear friend of mine, which is coming up, and she's turning 1, which is really exciting. So yeah, I would say that mine is probably about a little over a month ago. I had a client that was due at the end of December. So my birth statistic, I guess, is like baby's weight. And this little one was 10 pounds and 11 ounces. And this was like number 9 of my births. And I was like, wow, here we are.
Here we are. So Kat and I, we've laughed a lot this year because Kat, in her inaugural year of being a doula, has already experienced things I've never experienced in my career, which just goes to show how cool birth is. It's so different. No 2 births are like, I've never had a baby that big. In fact, 1010 is my largest birth doula baby. Wow. And then my own baby was the second freaking largest at 10 pounds, 6 ounces. So awesome. Yeah, so you've already had a baby. You've helped birth a baby bigger than any baby I've ever helped birth.
I love that.
And your first year. Kat, also, you had a client have a hysterectomy, an emergency. I've also never had that.
Same client. Yep. Yeah, so she had a pretty severe postpartum hemorrhage, and yeah, ended up having a full hysterectomy.
And I don't know the statistics on that, but in 22 years and over 1,000 births, I've never had a client have a hysterectomy. Mariza, you're a little bit more seasoned. You've been doing this since 2019. Have you ever had a hysterectomy from a birth?
I have not had a private client that where that was a result. I supported a friend who that was her outcome.
Just 1 in 6 years. Yeah. And I'm 0 in 22 years. It's super rare. And then Kat, you also had an in-call birth, right?
An in-call birth.
Like in the sack, like the baby born in the sack.
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay. Maybe it was a different intern.
Yeah, I was about to say you're thinking of somebody else. I'm like, remind me. I was at a birth of someone that they didn't end up having a uterine rupture, but they were at risk for one. They were showing some signs of potential uterine rupture. So
yeah. And then everything else has been relatively uncomplicated for you this year?
I would say so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for the most part. They've been beautiful, wonderful births.
Yeah, amazing. Now, have you done any home births or is this all in the hospital?
I have not. Mine have all been in the hospital. No home births or no birthing centers yet. I hope to change that soon.
Yeah.
So.
Well, maybe we should record in another year and see like an update on like what doula work looks like in year 2. So,
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, Mariza, how about you tackle that icebreaker next of like most surprising statistic for you?
So I think that especially from this year specifically, is more around epidural rates. I shouldn't say maybe surprising, but I just think it's good information. And it was helpful for me to see, planned or unplanned epidurals. I think that it's been a good learning to see how, as a doula, like supporting someone with an epidural, how critical it can be, but also just like letting people know that even if you're planning to have an epidural, having doula support is so important. And being at the hospital too, having the conversation with my coworkers of how I can still support, the patients that they're caring for once they have an epidural. I think initially when we first started the program, nurses would be like, "Oh, well, she's got her epidural, so like we're good." And I'd be like, "Oh, tell me more. Like, let me have a conversation with her." So I think that has been surprising too, just to see. And thinking about too, I know we talked a lot about some statistics from around the world in different places, and Kat gave us some really great information about Japan and learning about their like 8% epidural rate, which is more specific to like anesthesia availability. But, I think that having that information about the people that we're supporting, but just also about like birth as a whole really like reframes my thinking about like what my role is in the birth and how I can impact someone's experience a bit differently, regardless of, what's going on in terms of like their pain relief options.
Yeah. Well, I actually have some really good statistics prepared from my own epidural rates, cascade of interventions, cesarean section. And so I think that in this podcast episode, there's going to be some room for a really good and a really honest discussion about kind of what's going on. And specifically in the United States, the statistics that I'm comparing some of this stuff to are not worldwide rates, but in the US. And just a side note, you guys, we are recording this on February 20th. Holy shit, was it difficult to find data on women's health. Like if you are listening to this from around the world, you guys, like the United States right now I don't even know what's happening. I can't even, but finding information on women's health. Oh, I'm sorry. They've just shut down every government organization and website, and it was nearly impossible to get this data. Thank God for mom bloggers who like had some old blogs that we could we could look at. I was like, I need something more than from 2017, since, yeah, it's a shit show over here. And hopefully something happens that we can support women's health. So I digress. Katie, what has been the most surprising for you in this? And this is your inaugural year too.
Yeah, so I think the most surprising thing is when I first started, I remember we were having a conversation about how, you know, with being a birth doula, a lot of women and birthing people are having a labor of some sort that is not a planned C-section. And my first two babies off the bat were an unplanned C-section with an induction and then another C-section just straight off the bat. Like that is what I walked straight into. So I thought that was kind of like funny how it's not really what like any of us were planning for, and that's just how it happened.
Yeah. And so it doesn't happen overnight, right? Like when we look at the statistics of like what a doula brings to a birth, and it shows a significant reduction in your risk of having a cesarean section. So Katie, it is really interesting because if you look at any certifying doula organization, they typically publish their statistics, right, on what the positive benefits of having a doula are, like reducing your chances of having a cesarean section, reducing the length of labor, improving positive birth outcomes and experiences, and less birth trauma. The list goes on and on and on of the positive experiences that we bring to a birth room. But it takes a long time to look back on your career and wonder, have I made a difference? Right? Because when you first start out, you're just a witness for a long time of the medical system. And the first couple of years, you got to think you're making a difference in the person's life that you're serving and their family, but we may not be changing birth outcomes for a while, right? Because we have to get in there and we have to learn and we have to witness, and then we make tweaks, okay, to the way that we practice. So
And
I'm
you
not
talk about
surprised, Katie. I did too. I had so many C-sections the first 5 years of my career. And then eventually I learned a few things, right? Of like, what happened? Was that necessary? Sometimes the answer is yes. And if the answer was no, like how could that have been prevented? So, all right, let's get into it. Ready? Okay, so I had 54 clients. 11 of them were not on my shift. So I wanted to talk about that first. So, and when I say not on my shift, for a good part of this year, I worked day shift, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And then I had a work partner that would work the night shift, 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. because it is really hard to support 24 hours of labor. It's really hard to support. Some labors go really long, 50 hours. Some are really short, 2 hours. We're going to talk about that too. But working shift work, just like your nurses do, just like your OB or your midwife do, sometimes it's really helpful. And so I did that for a lot of this year. But that means that there were 11 births that I didn't attend. Anybody want to guess why I didn't attend them?
your shift partner was there.
Right. But I mean, I wasn't there at all.
Oh,
So
yes.
that means they had a less than 8-hour labor,
Mhm.
and all of their, well, maybe not. Maybe they had early labor before they called in for doula support. But by the time they called for doula support, it was less than 8 hours and it was through the night. So unfortunately, there's 11 of my clients that I never got to love on due to shift work. So, but that brought me to looking to some statistics that we did not talk about in the internship, and that is a peak time of delivery. So, in home birth compared to hospital birth. So, I just want you guys to speculate with me for a minute. When do you think, not when do most labors begin, not when is hard labor, but when are most home birth babies delivered? When do those babies come?
The early morning hours, I would guess between like
Yeah.
11 p.m. and 4 a.m. would be my guess.
Okay. Anybody else have some guesses?
I was going to say between like 4 and 8 a.m.
Okay. Mariza, you have a different answer?
I think my answer is the same if I
Okay.
had to guess.
Okay. So I'm really proud of you guys. Maybe you learned a lot in your internship. So yeah, when undisturbed completely and we're left to be in our mammalian state, in home birth, when they looked at home birth, peak birth times for vaginal births were 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. Okay, now let's think about the average length of labor for a first-time person giving birth is 24 hours. So when the hell did that person's labor start?
The morning before.
The morning before. 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. the morning before. So they woke up in the middle of the night and they were having really strong contractions, probably 2 to 3, 4 minutes apart, probably 45 seconds long, probably pretty short. And then the sun came up and I'm going to air quote their labor stalled, right? Because it's normal. And then their other children maybe woke up if it wasn't the first time, or they went for a walk, they went about their day, they ate some food. And then suddenly, maybe as we got closer to the sun setting and night settled in, the contractions picked back up to be stronger and longer and closer together. Usually their water's still intact in a home birth too until the very end. And then I would say probably in this statistic, if they're birthing between 2 and 5 a.m., shit got real around 9 or 10 p.m. Probably called in their doula, right? And then they labored really hard in active labor, transition, pushing, and gave birth between 2 and 5 a.m. So when is the peak time for vaginal birth in a hospital?
Do you want us to guess again?
Yeah, sorry. That's a guessing question.
I would
No,
say
great.
yeah, I would say between like noon and 9 p.m.
Okay.
Like kind of that late afternoon, evening.
Okay.
Mhm.
Let me say you could answer this in 2 ways: medicated or induced, augmented with Pitocin or induced with Pitocin, the use of anesthesia, and then unmedicated. So that's, Mariza, are you going with like 12 to 9 as like induced epidural?
Yeah.
Okay. Kat, what do you think it is if they were unmedicated? No anesthesia, no augmentation, no induction.
I'm going to guess like between 8 a.m. and noon.
Okay. And then Katie, what about you? You can guess either way.
Oh, I would have to say for unmedicated before noon, but after like 7 a.m., but medicated, I want to say like 5 p.m., like just super late in the evening.
Yeah. You guys are so good. I feel like I'm so proud of you right now. Okay, this was really interesting to me. So those that transferred to a hospital at some point in their spontaneous labor did give birth between like 8 a.m. and noon was the peak time. Okay, unmedicated. So, so if you're undisturbed at home and you don't transfer locations, 2 to 5 a.m., if you transfer locations or some sort of disruption, but you still don't have augmentation and induction or anesthesia, it's just, maybe your labor is a little bit longer or delayed up until about like that noon period. And then induction, augmentation with Pitocin, and epidurals. Everybody gave birth between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday through Friday.
Yeah. And not on a holiday.
Doesn't surprise me.
I honestly,
how funny
my
is
thought process on it was, when does the shift normally end for nurses? Because sometimes people want to give birth to specific nurses and they're like, okay, time to full send it.
Yeah. Well, there was also these huge dip like around 5 to 8 p.m., it was almost like not no births, but when you look at the graph, it just drops like it's a straight slope down to like from 5 to 8 p.m. It's like flat, like of course some people are going to give birth, but it's like, and then it picks back up. And then around the average time for unplanned cesarean sections. So any guesses when unplanned cesarean sections occur?
Midday would be my guess, like middle of the shift. I'm going to say like 11 a.m. to 1 p.m.
Okay. Mariza?
Yeah, I would say like 3 p.m. to 5 or 6 p.m.
Okay. Katie?
2 to 4
a.m. or p.m.?
p.m.
Okay. It's the first one you guys got wrong. So this one,
no.
Okay, this one really surprised me, but it is perfectly aligned with my statistics when we get into it. Okay. It's like around 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. So
Really?
you got to think they, for whatever reason in their induction or their epidural, they didn't get them birthed by 5 p.m., and then shift changes over. And then, I'm thinking maybe everybody wants to go to bed because they've got a 24-hour shift, but the surge of unplanned cesarean sections was between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Woo, mind blowing. Go ahead.
I will say too that just my personal experience, shift change most of the time is like 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. And a lot of times, especially for medicated patients, people are asleep most of the time and they just are avoiding the disruption.
Mm-hmm.
But you go from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., 11 midnight without moving a bit. I'm sure that can have some serious impact.
Yeah. And then, babies get stuck in the pelvis, right? Like we always say to our private doula clients, we do not care if you get an epidural or not. Okay.
Not at all.
Doesn't matter. There's like doulas are neutral on this. Okay. But what is important to be hyper aware of is when you are laboring without anesthesia, you and your baby are a team. You're working together. You're moving your pelvis, you're rocking, you're swaying. The movements are intuitive. And the second you are numb, which is okay, it helps relax the pelvic floor. But if you do not keep moving your pelvis the way that you would be moving your pelvis, the baby is now navigating birth without a partner. So if you're numb, you are no longer the partner. So it is very important that the doula is the partner, or if you have a spouse or a partner or a parent or a sibling or a sister or a friend or your labor and delivery nurse, that you ask them to be your baby's partner in moving your pelvis. And you can't move your pelvis once an hour. No person ever was unmedicated and just swayed to the left once per hour, It's constantly moving and stretching and swaying and moving energy downward. This is very, very important. So this is what doulas do. Our job is, I think, infinitely more important if you have an epidural because we have to move your body. And you're right, Mariza, between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., people get their epidural and they want to go to sleep, and that's okay. But you got to make sure someone's helping. You can sleep for a little bit, and then you got to make sure you remember you got to birth your baby, which means you have to move your pelvis, and you're dumb, so you can't move your pelvis. So somebody else has to move your pelvis for you. So I'm going to share some statistics now, and we're going to dig into it. So again, 54 clients, but 43, I was part of their, I played some role. 11 of my clients I just never got to see. So I had to remove those statistics because those statistics belong to other people that are not me. So N equals 43 for this podcast episode, but 2 were scheduled cesarean sections. I do get hired to attend scheduled C-sections. Maybe a client of mine in the past had a cesarean section, and this time they just want to schedule it. And they want me to go to the operating room with them and to PACU and to postpartum. So in this case, last year, 2 repeat clients scheduled their cesarean sections and hired me to be by their side. That is because if you're listening and you're like, how's that possible? In Charlotte, North Carolina, we have one hospital system. And that one hospital system, Novant, they allow doulas to be part of their team and welcome them to go into triage, the operating room, to hold you while you get your spinal or your epidural, and to be with you and pack you in postpartum and recovery and the NICU if needed. So it's really beautiful because it's continuous labor support, even with a scheduled C-section or an unplanned C-section. So most of this data is going to be around N equals 41. All right. So I'm going to jump straight to C-sections because that's kind of like what we were looking at. So the cesarean rate was that 10 out of my 43 clients had cesarean sections. Okay. But 2 were scheduled C-sections. So I had to throw that out. So that left me with 8 out of 41 had unplanned cesarean sections. That was a 19.5% cesarean rate. And that was really, really high. I would say for me, most years, my cesarean rate is less than 10%. So I wanted to take a deeper dive on that because I work day shift. So, I was like, why is my cesarean rate so much lower? So I only went to the operating room one time outside of those 2 scheduled C-sections when I looked back at last year. And I was like, so that was a 2.4% C-section for me personally. So, and that tracks with my statistics. They're usually less than 10%, often less than 7%. But I was like, why is the C-section rate so much higher on the night shift or when I'm not working? And it's not because my doula partners are shitty doulas, okay? They're great doulas. So I looked at the data and I was like, there has to be a something going on. And that's what goes back to that between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. is the surge in cesarean sections. And we looked back at our data and most of those 8 out of 10 were done. 7 out of the 10 were done on night shift. And so I don't want this podcast to be like, oh, well, those other doulas must not have been as great a doulas as Heidi. No, they're amazing doulas, but they were just on night shift. And that's where we have a higher peak of cesarean sections. Pretty interesting, right? So
I love that you took a dive into that.
Yeah, it just didn't make sense to me because my doula partners are awesome. So I was like, there's no way. I was like, this isn't like a doula specific thing. So I really wanted to make sure I looked at why my personal rate was 2% and why the overall rate was 19.5%. And I'm going to blame that on 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. surges. So, but the rate for the United States in 2023, don't have 2024 data yet, or our freaking government took it down. I don't know what's going on. Can't find it, but it was 32.3% overall cesarean rate in the United States. Now you're going to have places that have a 50% C-section rate, and then you're going to have places that have a 19% C-section rate. I'm very curious what the lowest C-section rate hospital is in the country. I couldn't find that information. I do have some statistics around the city that I work in, though, and they've jumped recently. So the hospital that I primarily work at, they've always had around 19, 20, 21% C-section rate, and this year was 25% C-section rate. So I also saw that like my C-section rate went up to 19.5%, but the hospital I work at also skyrocketed. So those two things are, for me, very correlated, and I don't know what change, right? I'd have to really sit down with the administrators and talk about like what were the key differences, maybe a higher induction rate, which I'll get to in a minute. But I just thought that was low. What do you guys think? 32.3% in the US. I feel like it's just much higher.
You feel like that's low?
Yeah, I feel like it's higher than that.
Relatively speaking. Yeah, I was about to say my brain was actually going to that too. I was like, I feel like it might be higher.
Yeah. So I feel like if you dropped like the really high or the really low, I really feel like it's more likely to be around 40%. So, but
Marisa, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just trying to think. I'm wondering too, like over time, especially in the past, I would say 5 years or so, where that's something that people are paying attention to, providers included, and they're wanting to impact those numbers. And there's been more of an effort to impact those numbers if there is some improvement, but maybe not drastic improvement. I could see that. And then I'd also be curious to see if the change with vaginal deliveries and like assisted vaginal deliveries has gone up instead of down. So it's maybe instead of having a cesarean section, you have a vaginal delivery with a vacuum. And maybe that's an alternative that people are using more frequently, and as opposed to the years where maybe the C-section rate was a bit higher. I'd be curious about that.
yeah, you know what? I actually didn't look at the rate of vacuum. My forceps rate was 0. My episiotomy rate was 0, but I did not look at the rate of vacuum assisted deliveries. There was a few. I would say it was probably less than 7 or 8%. I had a few vacuum assisted deliveries out of 41, but not a ton. So, but listen, for 2023, we got to go with the 32.3% C-section rate for the United States, and that's what it is. But guess what? 19.5% is still lower than 32.3%. Getting to the point where, yes, having a doula does reduce the risk of having a cesarean section. So, Mariza, do you keep your stats? Do you have any stats, or does the hospital keep them for you?
The hospital, we keep general stats for the unit monthly. So we track monthly things like cesarean rate overall, primary C-sections, successful VBACs, inductions ending in cesarean. And we track it monthly, and it's posted so everyone can see it, including anyone who's visiting. And yeah, I would say that tracks. Yeah.
I'm curious to see at our next meeting if they address that, because they became the second highest cesarean rate for all of the hospitals in Charlotte. And that was the opposite of what it's been for many, many years. So just curious to see what the change is when we can dig into it.
Look to something that I've noticed for me personally is that fewer hospitals are offering high risk pregnancy care and delivery care. And so a lot of the scheduled cesareans are coming to where I am, which is included in that C-section rate. So I'm wondering if maybe that's the case for Novant too. They have become really like one of the largest providers in the area for delivery. So rather than those kind of unscheduled or unpredictable cesareans, more of those scheduled procedures really impacting those numbers for sure.
Yeah. And I would say in my area, there's a lot of transferring going on. So of the 54 clients, I would say more than half of them started out at another hospital system and ended up transferring to the Novant hospital system. So because the reputation is so good for the quality of care. So take cesarean out of it. Birth experience, pregnancy experience is so high that a lot of people are switching to that hospital system. So you're right. It could be just a difference in risk. Absolutely. So, go ahead.
Oh, I just had a quick question. That transfer rate, are you talking about during the duration of their pregnancy or particularly during the duration of their labor?
No, like at some point in their pregnancy, they switched.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, okay. So the next thing I want to get into is inductions, right? So I looked at the average gestation when undisturbed is around 41 weeks, 1 day for the world. Okay. For home birth in the United States, it was 40 weeks, 5 days. So when we look at the home birth rate, which is again, undisturbed, spontaneous labor, no augmentation, that kind of thing. In the United States, it was 40 weeks, 5 days. So that was a little bit shorter than like the world's, 41 weeks, 1 day as an average gestation. But in hospital birth specifically, it was 38 weeks, 5 days. That was such a huge difference between 1990 and 2020. So 50% of all births in 1990 went over 40 weeks. And in 2020, only 30%. And the average gestation was 38 and a half weeks. But during that time, from 1990 till now, there's been no change in home birth gestation. So that's very consistent. I also wanted to note that from 1990 on in home birth, that time period between 2 and 5 a.m., that was also unchanged. So that really talks about our labors start at night. They kind of naturally lull during the day, and then they pick up the next night and take off to delivery in the middle of the night. So I thought it was really interesting that over this very long period of tracking, that more than 30 years, that home birth continued to stay primal and mammalian, and the data was very consistent, and that hospital birth had lots of changes all over the place for it. So my induction rate was 22%. In the United States, the last data I could find was 2023, and the induction rate was 33%. So again, statistics for doulas that are matching that having a doula reduces your risk of or choice of having an induction. But here's what was the most interesting thing to me with gestation. So the average gestation for all of my clients, 39 weeks, 5 days. So less than kind of the spontaneous home birth statistic we're seeing, but definitely longer gestating than the 38 and 5. But the average gestation for no induction, spontaneous labor, all clients, those were 39 weeks, 6 days. So all my clients, 39 weeks, 5 days. Spontaneous labor, no induction, 39 weeks, 6 days. Pretty comparable. And then the average gestation for my clients who got induced, 39 weeks, 4 days. I mean, it was like 1 day off, you guys. So I looked at this data and I was like, if you would have just waited 2 days, you would likely have had spontaneous labor.
Yeah, your baby would have come.
I know. So I feel like that was, you asked the icebreaker, and this was my answer, is I was just like expecting that like going for an induction was going to significantly change gestation. And it was like, oh, just wait 2 more days and you probably would have gone into spontaneous labor. I mean, we don't know that for sure, but the data is there, So do you guys have any thoughts or questions about induction rates?
Yeah, I was actually going to touch on or ask you I know you may not have a specific statistic of this, but kind of what are the typical reasons that you're seeing induction rates? Is it because of someone's BPP score, their biophysical profile, or what are kind of those reasons that they're going into that?
Yeah. So again, my induction rate was 22%, which means 78% of my clients did not have an induction. The ones that had an induction working with a doula, there may have been a one or two that just elected it, right? That were just like, I'm done being pregnant. But that is very, very rare. Most of these are, I would say, medically recommended. I'm not going to use the word medically necessary. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a midwife. I can't make a call like that. So I don't know if it's necessary. I just know these were recommended, and they All of my clients went on an induction list, though. They didn't say, like, this is so urgent, you have to be induced right now. Well, that's not true. I'm sorry. I just interviewed Kinsey Petty, the winner of Survivor, who's my doula client, on her birth story, and she had spontaneous labor, but she went in and her biophysical profile, which is the ultrasound that looks at amniotic fluid, practice breathing, fetal movements, blood flow. She was showing very low amniotic fluid. And so they were like, you know what? We want to induce you today. But she was also almost 42 weeks gestation. So let's be real. They were going to want to induce her anyway. Like if this had happened at 39 weeks, they would have been like, well, maybe we can wait a few days. But at 42 weeks and low amniotic fluid, they're like, let's have this baby today. And we did a natural induction with castor oil, and she had the baby before her induction time at 8 p.m. So, you know, but I would say most are medically recommended. So there's gestational hypertension. Your blood pressure is creeping up, and like, let's get this baby out before this turns into full-blown preeclampsia. There's a few that you're going to catch that are full-blown preeclampsia. The preeclampsia rate was 2 out of 43 clients, and that was 4.6% was my preeclampsia rate. The average preeclampsia rate in the United States is 4%. So my preeclampsia rate and the US rate was spot on, but those were two inductions that were kind of more emergent. Like, you know, right now we're going for an induction because of preeclampsia. I've also had inductions because the water broke and labor just didn't start like 48 hours later or 24 hours later. If you go to the hospital right away with your water broken, you're probably going to get induced pretty quick. So labor usually starts within 6 or 8 hours. 70-something% starts within 24 hours, and then like 90-something% starts within 48 hours. Every now and then I have inductions because they had premature rupture of the membranes, water broke, and just contractions just didn't start in a timely manner for, you know, hospital policies and procedures. So I'm trying to think of what else caused inductions this year.
Did you have any gestational diabetes or?
Yeah, but everybody was diet controlled. And
Okay.
so, you know, I still see inductions for gestational diabetes, but like not as early as 37 or 38 weeks when they're diet controlled, but definitely around 39, 40 weeks, which you saw the average induction gestation was 39.4. So I was like, that was pretty in line with, so we do have some type 1 diabetics just didn't have that have nothing to do with gestational being pregnant. But I didn't have any this year. But you can have insulin dependent gestational diabetes, and that's going to be an induction closer to like 37 weeks. That's going to be an earlier one. Just didn't have any this year. I had all diet controlled and in that 39th week. And I'm just really trying to think about, I didn't have anybody like fail a biophysical profile or a non-stress test. I didn't have anybody because they had low fetal movements or any of the scary things like a placental abruption or nothing, like just really nothing like that. So it was pretty much isolated to, oh, I know. I did have a few clients who agreed to an induction simply because AMA and or IVF. So advanced maternal age or in vitro fertilization. Every single provider that I have come across that works for maternal fetal medicine wants you induced at 39 weeks for IVF or for AMA. A lot of my clients push back against that. If they're healthy, they've done non-stress tests and they continue to watch the baby on ultrasound with biophysical profile, then I do see them buy themselves a little bit more time. Again, going back to like my no induction rate was just 2 days off from my induction rate. So yeah. Mariza, is there anything else that you saw in your practice this year with inductions?
No, I think that covers really the big ones. The gestational hypertension is a big one.
Yeah.
And then that that premature rupture, especially for like preterm,
Yeah.
obviously.
What
Yeah.
I want the audience to hear is that no one was induced because of a big baby, because of macrosomia. And in fact, the American College of Gynecology says that's not a reason for induction.
IUGR, I think, is much more
Yes.
prevalent than your baby is big.
Yes.
But the saying, at least in this area, especially in the city, has been, it's from coming from doulas, has been like, small babies are the new big babies, where like people used to have inductions for these big babies, and now they're having inductions for diagnosed IUGR, and not always is that the case when the baby is actually born. You know,
Yes.
like a nice 7-pound baby.
So a couple of years ago, they started a new measurement, the AC, the abdominal circumference. They used to just look at other things like femur, but now we're seeing a lot more intrauterine growth restriction, IUGR or SGA, small for gestational age, with adding this AC, this abdominal circumference measurement. I have had a few that were quite accurate, like they induced, the baby was very small or was experiencing that growth restriction. And then I've had many more where an 8-pound baby came out when they thought it was going to be 5.5-pound baby. So, they're not that accurate. You know, they told me Max was 8 pounds and his ass was 10 pounds, 6 ounces. So I was like mad on the opposite. I was like, you made me push out an almost 11-pound baby out of my vagina, and you told me it was going to be 8 pounds, and I believed you, you know?
Yeah.
So
the margin of error is like, I think close to, the last I looked, I think around 10% for the like growth calculations. And if you think about what 6 pounds is, and 10% of 6 pounds on either side is pretty big.
Yes.
It's like 10% of 6 is a lot.
Yes.
So you can have quite a wide margin there.
Yeah, you really can. And I almost feel bad when my clients call me and they say, oh my gosh, Heidi, we had an ultrasound and I'm measuring a head and the baby's measuring big. And I literally could care less.
Correct.
I'm like, did you have something you wanted to talk to me about today? Because I'm like, okay, so let me jump to a story, a birth story. And I wasn't sure if I was going to use names, but I'll just use some names of the ones that I know wouldn't mind. I had Caroline hire me for a VBAC this year, and she was my last birth of the year, and she had the biggest baby of the year. So we haven't gotten into the statistics, but my largest full-term baby this year was 9 pounds, 5 ounces, and she was 39 weeks and 5 days. No, 39 and 6. Sorry, it was 1 day before her due date. And so if you go back to my statistics, you guys, with the average gestation being 39 weeks, 5 days, I think that's why I didn't have a bunch of 10-pound babies this year, because a lot of clients just didn't go to 41 and 42 weeks this year. A lot of them went into spontaneous labor early, unlike Kat's 10-pound, 10-ounce.
Yeah, at 40
On that
weeks.
note, did your client have gestational diabetes?
No.
No. Okay. Well, good. Sometimes
yeah.
gestational diabetes can be an indicator of a larger baby. But anyway, so Caroline had hired me because she had the baby stuck in her hip, and again, epidural, you know, probably in the middle of the night, and they sort of just like left her there and didn't rotate her position. And this 7.5-pound baby came out on her first birth, and they just said, just wouldn't fit through that, just small pelvis or whatever. So Caroline comes into my care. We do a lot of work and we do a lot of practice to get ready for this birth. And we do a natural induction with castor oil and a membrane sweep. So the midwife did a membrane sweep. Just to note, castor oil is contraindicated in VBAC, but she did get permission from her hospital midwife to do a lower dose of castor oil. So 1 tablespoon instead of 2 tablespoons. So this is not to go against medical advice. This is actually under the direction of her midwife, who gave medical permission for her as a VBAC to do this. So she gave her a membrane sweep, and we went home and I'm like, I wasn't with her. She went home and she drank the midwife's brew, and she went for a walk and she did all of the things. And and then she was in labor, and I worked with moving her pelvis. She really wanted an epidural, man. She really did. And anesthesia walked in for her epidural, and I had to hold her and look at her in the eyes, and I said, "Caroline, you're pushing. There's no time for an epidural. I'm so sorry." I was like, "But," and the anesthesiologist came in and looked at her, and she was like, "Ugh," and I was like, "You're just gonna push your baby out in a couple pushes." But I was like, "But because you're unmedicated," I was like, "Let's just do this. Get on your hands and knees." I could see from her McAllister-Rumbus, like she had the sacral bulge, and she was heavy on the left side, so she needed to put her left leg up in runner's lunge. She throws that leg up in runner's lunge, starts crowning, easily delivers this 9-pound, 5-ounce baby. And y'all, I'm kind of a jerk because it was the same medical team as the first birth. And I was like, y'all, you told her a 7.5-pound baby didn't fit out of her. And then she just squatted a 9-pound, 5-ounce baby in like 2 seconds. I was like, maybe it has something to do with position when you're pushing. So I had asked her, "What position did you push in, Caroline," before she hired me? She said, "I was on my back with my legs wide." And I was like, "Well, on your hands and knees and runner's lunge gets a 9.5-pound baby out. On your back with your legs wide doesn't get a 7.5-pound baby out." So anyway, my largest full-term baby, 9 pounds, 5 ounces. The smallest full-term baby, 5 pounds, 1 ounce. And I actually had 2 5-pound, 1 ounce babies that were at full term at 40 weeks. They were small for gestational age, but both of their the mom and the in this case it was a mom and a dad for both, they were both very small people. Like, you've got like
Checks.
a 4'11" mom and a 5'6" or 7" dad, and just tiny people, so I wasn't expecting them to have more than a 5-pound baby. But let's go to the US. So any guesses, you guys, on average birth weight for male and female at full term?
I would guess like 7'5", maybe.
Okay. Mariza, Katie, do you have any other guesses?
I would guess like high 6. So like maybe 6'10".
Okay. Katie?
I'm going to say 7 for female and 7.5 for male.
Okay. I love that you differentiated that too, Katie. Spot on. So 7'6" for male, 7'2" for female. And then what was really interesting to me is I always thought that there were more females than males in the world and in the United States. I don't know. Did I just have that totally wrong? Because since the 1700s, the data has been 51% male and 49% female. Like data went way back. And it's about 50-50, but it's every single year it's skewed higher male live births than female.
Interesting. I actually thought it was the other way around.
Me too. I'm so confused by this, unless AI failed me today. But I looked at I really looked at lots of different sources and graphs, and it was across the board. I even had one study that just went from 2014 to 2024. It was a 10-year study, and every year 51-49, male, female.
Wow.
So, and then that study also quoted that it went back to the 1700s, which is maybe that's as far back as they have some data. I don't know how accurate those scales would have been back then. Who knows? But yeah, that was pretty surprising to me too. So, all right. So let's move into epidural rates versus unmedicated. I'm going to quiz you guys again because you went through the internship, but what % of people that are surveyed say they want to have an unmedicated birth?
Of your clients?
No.
Or just in the...
When they just survey pregnant people and they say, "Hey, would you be open to an unmedicated birth?" How many people do you think say, "Yeah, I think that would be cool and I'm open to that"?
My guess would be like 30 or 40%.
I
Okay.
would say the same, like 30%, if I had to guess. I really don't know. That's such an interesting question.
Let's see if Katie has a guess.
It's hard to say with like between their if it's their first birth, I want to say it's a higher percentage, but if it's not their first birth and they've done it before, then I want to say it goes down to like 20.
Okay.
I think if it's their first time, like 45.
Okay. Katie, you are my deep thinker. And separating, that's like a really great thing also to separate out, right? Like, so 80% of females birthing in the United States say, yeah, I think I'd want to have an unmedicated birth. And then what do you
That
think the
is much higher
cesarean
than
rate
I thought.
is when they actually have a contraction? They go into labor and they have a contraction. What do you think the US's epidural rate is?
I'll go last because I know the US's epidural rate.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So I'll let you guys guess first.
Okay.
Oh, maybe 78%.
I was going to go for 63.
Okay. You guys are like spot on. I have 2020 and 2024 cat. So what do you have?
So mine's from 2024. I think it was like estimated like 71, 72.
Okay. And this is where you guys were looking at all different studies, but we're like pretty close. So the study I looked at was 67%. Kat looked at a study that was 71%. I mean, neither here nor there. I mean, that's about the same. In 2020, it was 74%. So we have seen a reduction in the epidural rate, but it's just very interesting that like 80% would say, yeah, I would want an unmedicated birth. And then 70%-ish have an epidural. My epidural rate was 58%. So again, having a doula reduces your chances of having an epidural. That meant 42% of my clients had an unmedicated birth. Again, I don't care if you have an unmedicated birth or a medicated birth. What I care about is moving your pelvis so that we give you the best shot at having a vaginal birth. But I do like showing that my data is very aligned with what we say as doulas we're going to do. We actually do, and the data really matches that. Okay, in my whole career, I had my second time this year. Kat was with me, you guys. Only the second time in my whole career did someone go into spontaneous labor, have no intervention. So think like a home birth, but this isn't a hospital. No interventions, no augmentation, untouched, and have a cesarean section. So that remember I said I only went to the OR one time? That one time, that 2% C-section rate. That one time I went to the OR was with Kat, of course. I'm training an intern. And it was a VBAC who started to have a uterine rupture. And thank God she was unmedicated, right, Kat?
Yeah, that's something that was huge to learn from. Which I would even let you touch on, Heidi, kind of what you guide people through that are desiring to have a vaginal birth after cesarean, because truly we would not have been able to understand that she was laboring differently than she did with her first baby, because she was having this burning sensation apart from the contractions.
Mm-hmm. So during the contraction, the burning sensation along her cesarean scar got worse. But even when the contraction ended, she still had this fiery burning sensation and it came on very quickly. So she was laboring awesome. And then because she was unmedicated, she felt it. And we were like, shit, I love you, but your uterus is getting ready to rupture and we got to go to the OR like right now. And, yeah, that was really hard. So the only other time I've been to the OR in literally over 1,000 births, spontaneous labor, unmedicated, was little feet came out. Damn it. And she was pushing and feet came out and the hospital wouldn't do a breech delivery. breech vaginal delivery. It was really disappointing. I think about her all the time. This was a couple years ago. And so I need that to sit with people. I have been to over 1,000 births in over 22 years. And I've only been to the OR 2 times for spontaneous labor, no Pitocin or augmentation, no epidural or medical interventions. What does that tell you? Mm-hmm. Which is like no shame if you get an epidural, but you need to be educated on the cascade of interventions. And the cascade of interventions is heavy on people not moving your pelvis. We cannot stress that enough. So, all right, I'm going to burn through some more of these statistics. Cord blood banking in the United States is 3%. My cord blood banking rate is 14%. If you listen to this podcast, I mean, I wish it was 100%. If you listen to this podcast, you know that my child had a birth injury. He has cerebral palsy. The first thing that they asked me was, did you bank cord blood? I was like, no. And then it cost me about $500,000 already to help my child. And so if I could go back in time and pay $49 a month for 8 years, oh my God. Can you imagine the hundreds of thousands of dollars that I would have saved? Not only them, it's not about the money. It's that my child's quality of life would have improved faster. His quality of life did improve, but it took a long time. So much PT, OT, and speech. And cord blood banking has right now, I think 87 or 88 known diseases, cancers that it improves or saves lives, completely can cure also. So I highly encourage everybody to look at anjahealth.com and use code BIRTHSTORY. You get a kit for free. So I thought I was really proud of that at least 14% of my clients, I can sleep at night knowing, if your baby falls off those monkey bars and has a head injury, you banked your cord blood. And that's awesome. Or they're 16 and they tear their ACL like I did, and I had to have a total knee replacement. Boom. Just go get some of those stem cells injected into that knee. You know what I mean? And heal your recovery. So that's cord blood banking. Meconium was 23%, and the average for the United States is 8 to 15%. I have no idea why meconium rate was high. I can't even. Maybe because we're going post-8 more often because less inductions. I don't know. We talked about preeclampsia was right in line. Chorioamnionitis, that's an infection of the amniotic fluid, the inside the uterus. It can affect the placenta. It can give a fever to mom and baby. My chorio rate was 7%. The average for the United States was 1 to 5%. So my chorio rate was higher, but my AROM was quite high. Artificial rupture of the membranes was 28%. I couldn't find the AROM statistic for the United States, but when you break water and then you do more than 5 vaginal exams after you break water, again, cascade of interventions, it's usually part of an induction, you increase your chance significantly of developing chorioamnionitis. So when I looked back at those that developed chorio, they were induced. Artificial rupture of the membranes was part of their induction, and then they went on to have many vaginal exams, long labors, and ended up with chorioamnionitis. It's fine. And I want everybody to hear this. Mom and baby were treated with Tylenol and antibiotics, and nobody went to the NICU. There was no long-term consequences of chorio. They just couldn't encapsulate their placenta. So spontaneous rupture of the membrane, 72%. On average, that ruptured in transition or pushing, so 7 to 10 centimeters dilated. So most of my clients who experience spontaneous rupture, either they had a vaginal exam and we knew they were 7 to 10 centimeters dilated, or as an expert who's watching the labor unfold, I can definitively diagnose that they were in transition and or pushing. So, so isn't that cool? 72% of the time it's that's right in line with all statistics that if you're untouched, your water's typically not going to break until the end of labor. It's not like the movies.
I think that's like surprising for people. And when I teach like childbirth ed, or if I'm, working with a client, I think that so many people for their first think that their water breaks so much earlier, either before or like in the very beginning. And yeah, it's like a huge mad dash. So I tell people that it sometimes isn't until the very end, and they're very surprised. So
yeah.
I love that.
IV pain meds were used 4% of the time, and I couldn't find the US rate. All that I could find for the US is it said that those who had IV pain medications were likely to go on to have epidural anesthesia. So like they didn't just stop with IV pain medications. Both of my clients, it was 2 out of 41 that had IV pain medicines, did also go on to have an epidural. So that statistic was in line with the US. I just don't know how many people use IV pain meds in labor. Now, nitrous oxide, I had a 20% nitrous oxide use rate, and 6 of those 8 that used nitrous oxide went on to stay unmedicated and without the use of anesthesia, did not have an epidural. So the only tool that they used for pain management was nitrous oxide. Only 2 of the clients who used the nitrous oxide went on to get an epidural. So I thought what I would conclude is using nitrous oxide reduces your chances of having an epidural. But unfortunately, the United States had the opposite of that. 68.9% of people who used nitrous oxide in the United States in 2023 went on to switch to have an epidural.
That's surprising to me. Especially my thought on that would be like, I don't really know what it's like for other people in the US to have like knowledge of nitrous oxide, but there's so many people that I've met that they're like, I didn't even know that was an option. My provider didn't tell me about that. So that's very interesting.
Well, it's said that less than 500 hospitals in the United States have nitrous oxide. So not even all the hospitals in Charlotte, North Carolina have nitrous oxide. So I don't think, and I've been at births before where the client has asked for nitrous oxide and like the tanks were empty. And I was like, are you freaking kidding me?
The person setting it up has never done it before because people really don't ask for it. So there is a learning curve, which is nobody's fault. But if you're waiting for it and it's someone's first time setting it up, it can take a bit of time.
Yeah. But I did think it was interesting that 20% of my clients did use nitrous oxide. So maybe that goes back to education. Like you have a doula that's educating you on what's available at your hospital and educating you on the pros and the cons of different types of pain management options like nitrous oxide. So goes back to have a doula, you guys. Okay, well, I could not find any data past 2017 for how often birthing people use a doula. So in 2017, it was 6%. And then every Google search that I did after that kept telling me 6%, 6%, 6%. I'm thinking it has to have increased since 2017. But I cannot find anything above 6%. So like, let's say it's grown to 10%. This is still relatively low. 59% of people in this study in 2017 were aware of what a doula was. So 40% of people that were pregnant in 2017 still didn't know what the hell a doula was. And then those that knew what a doula was, 27% said they wanted to have a doula, but there was some barrier like cost that prevented them from having a doula. I am so curious to see what that data would be in 2024, but I couldn't find it. So if you are listening to this podcast episode and you are a researcher and you want to dig in and you want to find that information for Birth Story Podcast, I will give you the shout outs. I will interview you. We will talk about it. But what I hear is doulas improve everything, but we're underutilized. We're underfunded. A lot of people aren't aware of what a doula is or the benefits of a doula. And then the people want to have a doula if they know what they are. But, access and money and hospitals, whether they let a doula in or not. Like, these are all big barriers. So let's talk a little bit about doulas and what they cost. So, Kat, it's 2025. You're a new doula with less than a year experience. What are you comfortable charging in a big metropolitan city?
So I charge $1,800 for my services. And I am a photographer as well. So that, that within itself doesn't include photography, but I have packages where people can say like, I would love to have birth pictures. That includes, I have a prenatal visit with my client. I am with them for the duration of their pregnancy or whenever they hire me. And I provide in-person support and then a postpartum follow-up. So yeah, those are what my rates look like with my business.
Yeah, that's this year. They may be different next year, you guys. So, Katie, you serve the military families and you accept TRICARE. What does reimbursement look like with TRICARE right now?
So right now they are doing $690 for just the labor portion. And then I want to say it's an additional $45 for like 6 prenatal and postnatal appointments. So
each one you would get $45.
Yeah, I charge exactly $1,000 and people pay maybe $50 out of pocket by the time like TRICARE reimburses them. But I'm not in like California TRICARE. Like, it's different from being East Coast TRICARE in Jacksonville, North Carolina versus San Diego in California. Because if I'm in California, San Diego, I'm charging a lot more than what I am here.
Yeah. I mean, cost of living in rural North Carolina is very different than cost of living even in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a bigger city. So now, Mariza, I know that you have your own private practice. You take clients through a bigger company also, and you work for Medicaid. So tell me about what the pricing differences look like in New York and kind of what the going rate is for somebody who has 6 years of experience and has been to how many births do you think you've attended? Because you work 3 shifts at the hospital a week, so a lot.
Yeah, I just hit 100 births about a week and a half ago, but I have supported at this point hundreds of labors, just not present for the actual birth.
Yeah. Okay.
I couldn't even count.
I would say, you guys, when I say I've been to over 1,000 births, that's probably actually inaccurate for me to say that, because I did shift work for a long time. So those are labors. I have attended, maybe I did get off shift before the baby was actually born. So that's a good distinction. Thank you. I should probably change the language when I'm talking about labors I've supported or families I've supported versus the actual birth, because even before the vendor program at Novant, if they went to C-section, I wasn't there for the actual birth because at that time they wouldn't let doulas in. In other hospitals, they still don't let us in. So that is good to separate that out. So if I am you, I would say I've just been to hundreds. I've supported hundreds of labors.
It's about 2 or 3 births a week, and then probably 10 laboring families a week. So
yeah, that's a lot.
It adds up quick.
Yeah.
But yeah, I for private clients who hire me to, work with them prenatally and accompany them to their birth, wherever it is, whichever hospital, home, is $2,500, which I would say is pretty middle of the road for my area. I know some doulas personally who are charging $1,500, $1,800, and I know some doulas personally who are charging $5,000, $6,000. So I would say I'm like right in the middle.
Yeah.
Medicaid in New York State is reimbursing it's a little over $1,200 for a doula to use for prenatal appointments, birth, and then up to a year postpartum. So some people are utilizing that for postpartum care. Some are utilizing it for birth. And the hospital program that I work for pays me hourly. And anyone laboring in the hospital using a doula service pays nothing because it's covered by a grant from the state rather than through Medicaid, which is really nice.
Awesome. I want to see your statistics for your hospital of those that utilize the complementary doula services versus those that don't. I'm like, I'm assuming with the grant, they're going to have to publish the data. So please let us know when it comes out.
Yeah, we definitely track. It's imperfect at the moment because it is sort of self-reported the way that we're tracking it, but that will be changed soon. And yeah, it's really interesting to see. And that I think is like we were talking about people who want a doula versus people who have a doula versus people who don't even know what a doula is. And that's been really interesting to be a part of. Because most of my conversations with people are explaining what I do to begin with, and while they're in labor. So it's kind of a like, I see you're in labor, here's how I can help. But then also to like getting a really strong understanding of those barriers. Like you mentioned financial barriers, but also like language barriers. I support plenty of people who speak zero English. And it's not so simple as just, I need a Spanish speaking bilingual doula. It's, languages from all over the world where if there's not a doula in your area, like that's a really difficult thing to support somebody prenatally or even to go look for a doula when you don't speak the language. And then also just like culturally or their current like care as well is really difficult. So it's interesting to be able to be a part of that because not only do they get a doula at no cost, but they don't have to do the legwork to find a doula. Like it's just there for them, which is really nice too.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because I was very specific in who I hired to be part of my team on Birth Story Boutique. And I was specifically seeking out people who, that were brown and Black women, as well as those that spoke other languages. So I am proud to say in Birth Story Boutique, I have doulas that speak Spanish, Castilian, and Portuguese. So I would love to add other languages to be able to support as many birthers as we possibly can. So, all right. So another thing about doulas I wanted to like debunk a myth is that you have to be a first-time birther to hire a doula. That is absolutely not true. And that remains true in my own practice. In fact, most of my clients for this year, for 2025, are repeat clients. So I have a lot of second, third, and fourth time birthers. I've actually been a doula all the way up for 5 births on several clients for all 5 of their babies. So I will say I looked at it this year and 63% of my clients in 2024 were first-time birthers and 37% of those that hired me were second and third-time birthers. Many VBACs. And so I did have all successful VBACs except for one. And the one is the VBAC that I told you about that had the it didn't actually rupture, but it was rupturing. So her uterus was about to rupture, but we were able to safely get her to the operating room before that happened. And all of my other VBACs were successful VBACs like Caroline. So I think it's also interesting that my largest baby was spontaneous, unmedicated VBAC. So, yeah, hiring a doula really does change. I mean, this just was why we wanted to do this. I mean, hiring Katie, Kat, Mariza, any doula, I mean, we really do support positive birth outcomes and changes in, infant mortality, 0, maternal mortality, 0. So I kind of wanted to end there also. My client base is very diverse. These statistics of 41, the majority of my clients were white but not by very much. It was almost a 50-50 split between white and then brown and Black clients. So I am very proud of the fact that the statistics that we see across the United States where Black and brown women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth, have cesarean sections, be coerced into medical interventions, That is absent in my practice. And that's something that I trained Katie and Mariza and Kat and all of my interns. And there are very specific things that we do. And I would say it's mostly around advocacy and education. So making sure that our clients, regardless of race, but especially our Black and brown clients, that they are educated and that they know how to advocate for themselves. Their partner knows how to advocate for them. And if everybody loses their voice in the moment, that's okay. They hired a doula that they have consented to advocate or speak on their behalf, when needed. So I was wondering if there was anything else that listeners would like to know. So please feel free to DM me on Instagram. It's birth.story.academy. You can also send me an email at hello@birthstory.com. But any parting thoughts, Mariza, Kat, and Katie, before we jump off on these statistics?
I did have one thought, which was when birthing people got an epidural, how often do you see them stall their labor after getting an epidural?
About 100% of the time. That would be like if I looked at not just this year, but like kind of all of the years. Very rarely. It does happen, but sometimes an epidural just relaxes the person who's giving birth and takes away their anxiety, and they've been clenching their pelvic floor and they take a nap and just the baby just comes down. I mean, that does happen. But more often I see their blood pressure drop. Then they have to use epinephrine. Then they have to use fluid. The baby kind of responds to that. And everybody just sort of says, new environment. And then often they get an epidural and then they're like, well, you're stalled, so let's break your water. And then they get chorioamnionitis and then their uterus is infected. So then it doesn't want to work as hard. I mean, when someone calls me and says, I want an epidural, but I don't want Pitocin on an interview, I'm like, well, huh? What? Very rarely do I ever see an epidural without the use of Pitocin. I mean, that is just incredibly, incredibly rare. So goes back to the time of delivery. You're going to stall during the day. Okay. But when you have an epidural, they're going to pump you with Pitocin and they're going to get that baby out between 8 and 5 p.m. And if they don't get that baby out between 8 and 5 p.m., by 10 to 2 a.m., you're at a high risk for a C-section, right? Because they don't want you laboring for 26 hours. So my average length of labor was 26.2 hours. And I would say that was some long inductions partnered with some really short. So my longest labor was, she was contracting for like 96 hours straight in an induction and ended in a cesarean section. And then 2 hours. Like there was a couple of what we call stop and drops. Like, you guys, we made it to the hospital. I made it to the hospital with them. But man, did we deliver 6, 10, 12, 15 minutes after delivery. So 10 of those 41 clients gave birth in less than 10 hours. So that goes back to my statistic of 37% of my clients are giving birth for the second or the third time last year. So yeah, Katie, no, I think it would be unrealistic and irresponsible if someone's planning an epidural to not have a conversation with them about what Pitocin looks like and the use of Pitocin in their labor.
Interesting. Cool.
Anything else, Mariza or Kat?
No, I mean, these are all so helpful and I love that you do this, and I'm going to take a page out of your book and start doing it for myself a little bit more and take a back look at the year of the data that I do capture and separate it out for just me so I can see too. I'll let you know.
I think it's valuable whether you attend 5 births a year or
Totally.
500, just start paying. I think that's the thing. Start paying attention. Start asking questions. The fact that I have collected this data means that I can go back to my hospital system and say, I have some questions about this data. Can we have a chat about it? I'm so curious to know if what you're seeing is what I'm seeing, or if this is just totally outlier stuff, I'm really thankful for you guys and the work that you put in. You guys, Kat and Mariza and Katie did all of these statistics. So I gave them all the data, and then they put it all into these spreadsheets and made it all happen. And they did a lot of amazing work with the guides that you'll see on the blog, in our newsletter, on the workbook at birthstory.com. You're going to see like co-authored or authored by Katie, Kat, and Mariza in a lot of those really critical articles. So I'm just so appreciative of you guys and being part of my journey in 2024 as I grew as a doula. And I hope you learned a lot.
Oh, yeah.
It did, for sure. It
Love
was, yeah, it will be it will be something I carry truly with the rest of my career. So thanks, Heidi.
Oh, you're welcome. Oh, and I forgot to tell everybody what I charge. Hold on. That's probably important. So yeah, like Mariza said, I think some of the most expensive doulas in the country are about $5,000 or $6,000 right now, and some of the least expensive are probably around $600. Again, like that goes back to Katie and like kind of working for like the government programs and such. I've given myself a raise every single year. I've given myself a raise every time I completed an additional training. So after 22 years in my career, you can see 1 year into the career, about $1,500 to $1,800 is pretty standard. And 22 years into my career, I'm charging $3,500. Most of my clients will tell you that I'm undercharging. The last 3 interviews I had asked the male partner what they thought a doula cost, because they didn't know after we went through the whole interview. And all 3 of them said $5,000. And I was like, shit, I'm undercharging. So anyway, know your budget, check with your HR benefits, see if you have rider benefits like Carrot, Maven, Progeny. There are a lot of companies that are paying for at least part of your doula services. And definitely check to see if you have any benefits that you can use. And let's spread the word about doulas, because again, we've only got that data from 2017, but let's spread the word about doulas, and hopefully we see the utilization of doulas wildly rise, because as we've shown here today, we do improve birth outcomes and birth experiences. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for listening to Birth Story. My goal is you will walk away from each episode with a clear picture of how labor and delivery might go, and that you will feel empowered by the end of your pregnancy to speak up, plan and prepare for the birth you want, no matter what that looks like.